You know, when you hear West Nile virus, you probably think what I do. Mosquito bite, a few miserable days with a fever and some aches, and then you're done with it. A nasty bug to get in the summer, for sure, but that's usually where the story ends. But it turns out, for a small group of people, the story doesn't end there at all. It takes a much more serious turn, one that goes right to the core of our nervous system.
I mean, seriously, what if a mosquito bite could actually mess with your vision, or even paralyze one side of your face? It sounds like something from a movie, right? But this is the unsettling reality for some patients. These aren't the symptoms we ever really talk about with West Nile, but a huge new review of cases from all over the world has found a clear and, frankly, a pretty concerning connection.
Okay, let's unpack that for a second. The key word here is neuroinvasive. All that means is the virus has somehow managed to get past the defenses protecting our brain and central nervous system. It's like the virus goes from being a general problem in your body to launching a targeted attack on your body's command center. Now, that less than 1% number is really important. This is not a common thing. But when it does happen, the consequences can be huge, leading to things like meningitis or the very specific nerve damage we're about to get into.
So, to really get a handle on this hidden danger, we're going to follow the evidence step by step. We'll see how scientists gathered all this information in the first place, and then we'll look at who these patients are and where they live. From there, we'll dive into the specific patterns of nerve damage, check out the chances of recovery, and we'll wrap it all up with the single most important lesson from all this: why catching it early is everything.
So how in the world do you even start to find a pattern in something so incredibly rare? Well, you have to basically become a medical detective. Researchers did something called a systematic review, which means they scoured a quarter-century's worth of medical reports to find every single documented case that fit this strange profile.
So what makes this kind of review so special? Well, it's not just about what one doctor or one hospital saw. It's about pooling together data from all over the planet, turning all these scattered individual stories into one single powerful data set. It's how you spot the kinds of patterns you would absolutely never see otherwise.
And this chart right here, it just shows you how intense that process really is. I mean, look at this. They started with over 1,800 articles. And after getting rid of duplicates and screening everything for relevance, they boiled that massive number down to just 30 studies that talked about 42 specific patients. Talk about finding a needle in a global haystack.
Okay, so now that we know how they found these cases, let's take a look at who these patients actually were, because the data starts to paint a really specific picture, both demographically and geographically.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. West Nile virus is found all over the world, right? But the vast majority of these specific nerve damage cases, we're talking almost 86%, were reported right here in the United States and Canada. That really makes you wonder, is there something unique about the version of the virus circulating here? Or maybe are we just better at reporting?
And who is the typical patient? Well, the average age was about 52 and a half. So, let's be clear, we're not just talking about the very elderly. This is affecting middle-aged adults, people who are right in the prime of their lives.
And as for gender, the data showed a slight lean towards men. They made up just under 55% of the cases. The study suggests this might actually track with a bigger trend, where it seems men in general have a slightly higher risk of getting the neuroinvasive form of West Nile.
All right, this brings us to the real heart of the investigation. We know who's being affected, but what is the virus actually doing to them? The data reveals some very specific targets inside our nervous system.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty, here's a super simple way to think about it. You've got these things called cranial nerves. Just picture them as the specialized electrical wiring that runs directly from your brain to your head and neck. They control your vision, how your eyes move, your facial expressions, you name it. So when a virus like West Nile attacks this wiring, the signals get all messed up and the things they control just stop working.
And it turns out the virus seems to have its favorite targets. Get this, the optic nerve, the one that controls vision, was affected in a full 50% of cases. Half. The facial nerve was next, causing paralysis on one side of the face in about a third of patients. And then the abducent nerve, which helps control how your eyes move, was hit in nearly 1 out of every 5 cases.
Now this is probably one of the most important findings in the entire review. The kind of damage people suffered was strongly, and I mean strongly, connected to their age. If you were younger than 51, you were way more likely to get facial palsy. But if you were 51 or older, you were at a much higher risk for optic nerve damage, the kind that leads to serious vision problems. That is a huge distinction for doctors to know about.
So, all of this sounds incredibly serious, and it is.
Which, of course, leads to the most important question for any patient and their family: what's the prognosis? Can people get better? The study also tracked what happened to these patients to see who recovered and what factors seemed to play a role.
And the outlook here is, well, it's basically a coin toss. The good news is that just over half the patients, about 52%, made a full recovery. But that leaves a huge portion who didn't. About 21% only recovered partially, meaning they were left with some lasting effects. And sadly, almost a quarter of the patients showed no recovery at all from their nerve damage.
So what was the difference? What separated those who got better from those who didn't? The data pointed to two really significant factors. First, patients who were otherwise healthy, with no other big chronic diseases, had a much better chance of a full recovery. And second, and this is a big one, a lack of recovery was strongly linked to patients who had not gotten antiviral drugs. Now, that's not proof the drugs are magic cure, but it is a very powerful clue.
So, after all that, what is the big takeaway here? It all really boils down to one simple, powerful concept that has huge real-world consequences for how we treat this disease. The message is crystal clear. If a patient has West Nile virus, especially an older patient, and they start to complain about blurry vision or any kind of facial weakness, every single moment counts. We saw how older patients are super susceptible to that optic nerve damage, and the researchers warned that any delay in getting a diagnosis and starting treatment could lead to permanent, irreversible vision loss.
And that leaves us with one final, crucial question to chew on. If we know these risks exist, and we know that catching it early is paramount, does it make sense to start proactively screening West Nile patients for these early signs of nerve damage? This research seems to suggest it just might be the key to turning a potentially devastating outcome into a story of full recovery.